my FPL Game Week 5 team selection. Game Week 4 was one of the worst game weeks of FPL we've had for quite a long time, but it doesn't mean we aren't planning and moving forward going into Game Week 5. There's also quite a big chance that I play my wildcard in Game Week 6. Today we're going to cover all of that. We'll have a look at my lineup, any potential transfers I'm considering making, talk about some flagged players, some potentially injured players that I've got in the likes of Joao, Pedro. What am I planning on doing in them with my Game Week 5 team selection? What is up everyone, FPL Harry here, and before we dive in, 2,000 likes is the aim, and subscribe if you are new around here as well. And today it is time to have a look at my Game Week 5 team selection. Before we do that, let's have a look at Game Week 4. I put in my transfer plans video on Sunday evening that it was a horror show, and I did get corrected in the comments that it could have been worse, but it did feel like almost everything apart from 2 players went wrong. I captained Erling Haaland for his 26 points, and I had Smith Rowe for his 7. Everyone else in my starting team did blank, a lot of 1s, a lot of 2 points. And of course, no Joao Pedro, who was my transfer in this week. I did have Chris Wood first sub over going with Gabriel. Gabriel probably should have been my first sub. Maybe it's hindsight, but I think he probably should have been. You on stream as well, watching on Saturday morning, did try and tell me that maybe he should have been first sub, but I decided to go with Chris Wood. I was right that Chris Wood and Nottingham Forest might get something from that game. I didn't expect Gabriel to score, but I should have understood that the defensive ability of Spurs from set pieces was pretty horrible, and we did see that with Gabriel getting a 15-pointer. It is always painful when you bench points, especially when it's a return like that. It did give me a red arrow. I moved from 196k down to 430k. It's still a decent enough start to the season, but I know it would be so good if I'd even just played Gabriel this week. It was 10 points below my safety score, which is of course the score I would need in order not to change rank. So about a 10-point red arrow. Let me know how you got on. Did you do well? Did you have Gabriel starting, or were you in the camp maybe you didn't have Erling Haaland at all? Let me know in the comment section down below how many points you did get, how you're feeling as well about the first 4 weeks of the season. Having a look at how my team is lining up going into Game Week 5, of course, I am not planning to win my wildcard this week. It's either going to be Game Week 6, Game Week 7, or I'm going to hold it later. In goal, we are going to stick with Henderson of Crystal Palace. Manchester United at home this week. It's not the best fixture, but I'm not going to use a transfer on a goalkeeper at the moment. I might consider it on wildcard. Of course, I will change him. Or if I don't wildcard, I will still probably consider a goalkeeper transfer in Game Week 6 or 7 to someone like Flecken or to someone like David Raya as well. But we're going with Henderson, and then we've got Matthews as their backup on the bench. Into defence, I have a benching decision to make. We are going to, of course, start Trent Alexander-Arnold against Bournemouth. He did pick up an assist in the Champions League on Tuesday evening. Hopefully he can get his first return in the Premier League this weekend against Bournemouth. And Pedro Porro is also going to start for me at home to Brentford. They've not been fantastic defensively for quite a long time, Spurs. And actually with Kulusevski and Maddison both starting, Pedro Porro's attacking output is a little bit weakened. And it is a player, if I wildcard, it is a player that I would consider potentially dropping because I've not been that impressed once those two start. If they go for midfielders in the likes of Bentancur, Pape Sarr, Bissouma, then Pedro Porro does get a little bit further forward. But whilst only one of them is playing, it does reduce Pedro Porro's attacking output. Then the benching decision I have is, do I bench Gabriel again going away to Manchester City, or do I bench Robinson of Fulham going up against Newcastle? I do think that both teams will probably concede, but the Manchester City versus Arsenal games often end up being quite low scoring. We saw that a couple of times last season as well. And although Haaland has been very good in front of goal recently, he's not been fantastic when he's played against both Gabriel and Saliba. So as a result, compared to my transfer targets video, my transfer plans video, I've swapped Gabriel and Robinson around. And then we've got Johnson of Ipswich sat last on the bench. Into midfield, again, we have a slight benching decision to make in terms of my front 7. So I will just load my front 7 in and we can talk about all of those and which of this front 7 maybe we should be benching this week. In terms of my midfield, we're going with Eze at home to Manchester United. There was a clip showing that he and Mateta actually did argue on the pitch about who was going to take the penalty. I hope that it is Eze that might take the next one and they might alternate, for example. But even if that's the case and he isn't on penalties, he's still on set pieces. He could have scored in that game. Goal and assist against QPR in the Cup midweek as well. So I am still okay with him, still favouring him as a decent pick at 6.9. Of course, without penalties, he's gone from being a great pick in my eyes to maybe being just a good pick now. I do still think he's a fine long-term hold. and Manchester United at home this week is still a fixture I absolutely am happy to play him in. Then we've got the double up on Liverpool, Diogo Jota and Mo Salah. I'm happy with Mo Salah to start with. Of course, didn't do anything last week, but he is the one that I plan on captaining this week. This was the fixture that I decided to bring him in last week, mainly focusing on this Bournemouth at home fixture. So I do need something from him this week, or the transfer will look completely pointless. I probably need quite a big haul because Saka, of course, outperformed him in game week 4 as well. So I do need quite a sizable haul from Salah if I'm going to make those two transfers pay off. Diogo Jota is one that is getting a slight little bit more focus. I do think he is absolutely fine to start this game. We did hear that Arne Slot mentioned that Cody Gakpo might be starting games and he actually wanted to start him against Nottingham Forest, but then he related it to Luis Diaz. It does sound like Gakpo and Luis Diaz are the left wingers that he has in his system, and Darwin and Diogo Jota are the two central players. And I think we can say safely, based on the performances we've seen from Darwin Núñez over the past few weeks, that it's not likely we get many starts from Darwin at the moment. Of course, after the Bournemouth game, they have a cup match midweek against West Ham, which does feel like when the backups, maybe Gakpo or Diaz, whoever doesn't start this weekend, maybe Darwin and maybe Chiesa will get starts in that fixture against West Ham midweek. I do expect Jota, Salah and Trent all to start this fixture. I don't have too much doubt about that. We might get an early sub for Jota though, based on the fact that he did start in the Champions League on Tuesday. The final starting midfielder that we've got is Morgan Rogers of Aston Villa. Wolves at home, the only one of the Aston Villa players not to get a return in the Champions League on Tuesday evening. Of course, he is dodging points like nothing we've ever seen before, but I do plan on continuing the faith. He is playing 90 minutes in pretty much every game. It is still a good fixture. Wolves at home in game week 5. Surely this week, or Ipswich away in game week 6, is when we're going to see Morgan Rogers get his first Aston Villa attacking return in the Premier League this season. On the bench at the moment, we do have Emil Smith-Rowe. Now, it is an okay fixture against Newcastle. He has outperformed several of the players in my starting 11 so far this season, but I do think it's one of the weakest fixtures. One of the other players that we could potentially bench is Chris Wood. He goes away to Brighton. Forest have been pretty good, of course, undefeated so far this season, but away at Brighton is definitely not an easy fixture. At the moment, it does feel like it's between Chris Wood and Smith-Rowe because they have the hardest fixtures on paper. Joao Pedro is also in my starting 11, and we are expecting him to be back fit and available for the weekend. They do play a cup match this evening, so you may well know that he's already back fit and available, but there is a chance, of course, he doesn't feature in the cup. So at time recording, I'm not certain if he's going to play the cup, but he does sound like he'll be back for the Premier League. But if he's not, I have Smith-Rowe to sub in, so I'm going to roll the transfer anyway. And I do think it'll be Chris Wood or Smith-Rowe that ends up on the bench. And as per the graphic, it's currently Smith-Rowe. Erling Haaland, of course, 9 goals in 4 games. This is a real test for him, though. He's never scored, I don't think, against Gabriel and the Saliba partnership. Let's see, can he do it? Can he continue his form that he's shown? Or will Gabriel and Saliba be able to lock him out once more? And will the likes of Foden and De Bruyne be locked up? Or will they be able to create some chances against that Arsenal team? It's set to be a fantastic game, but I have captained Erling Haaland for pretty much every game week so far this season, and he's only going to get the vice captain for me this week. I did actually plan on putting the vice captain on Trent, but a few of you correctly pointed out that you shouldn't captain and vice captain in the same game if you can help it, just in case something was to happen with that game and with that fixture in terms of the weather or a postponement or something like that. I'm going with Mo Salah with the captaincy option. That was the obvious. That was the banker. That's the reason we brought him in game week 4 was for the captaincy for Bournemouth at home. I plan on rolling my transfer 3-4-3. Of course, a small chance that Smith-Rowe and Robertson start. I am benching double Fulham, which doesn't feel ideal. Maybe I should find room for one of them in my starting 11, but at the moment, we've got double Fulham bench, rolling the transfer in a 3-4-3 with Haaland vice-captain and Mo Salah captain. Now, the other thing to talk about is will I wildcard, because I need to know when the game week 5 deadline passes pretty much if I'm going to play the wildcard. The issue is I think there's enough players I'm okay happy with in my lineup that I'm not forced to play the wildcard. Now, part of me feels like because game week 4 was so bad, a lot of people are being a bit reactionary and thinking, well, that makes the game week 6 wildcard more likely because we've had one bad game week where loads of players have blanked. But if we go into game week 5 and suddenly we do get a return from Morgan Rogers, let's say Chris Wood scores, let's say Eze takes the penalty or does get an attacking return from open play, then suddenly it starts to look a little bit better. I have a lot of players who fall into maybe monitor and maybe sell. For me, the goalkeeper situation is the only situation where I think there's a definite sell that I would change on wildcard. Joao Pedro would probably go because their fixtures coming up are not great. I would probably replace Diogo Jota. I'd probably replace Smith-Rowe and Robinson because their fixtures coming up don't look that great. but they're not priority sales where I feel like I definitely need to go and get rid of them. Rodgers hasn't returned, but he is still a 5.1 million midfielder. What massively more am I expecting? Trent and Porro are absolutely fine to hold in terms of defenders. If I don't double up on Arsenal defence because I've got Trent in there and Porro, that's not the end of the world. Of course, I would like double Arsenal defence, and Gabriel and Haaland about the only two players who are guaranteed to stay in my team if I did wildcard in game week 6. But basically what I'm saying is I don't feel like I'm essential to wildcard. I don't feel like there's enough players I have to change. There are a few players that I want to buy though going into it if I was to wildcard. And that mainly revolves around Arsenal. It would be doubling up on the defence and it would be adding Bukayo Saka back. But I do have one transfer and I will have 2 transfers going into game week 6 where I could do Mo Salah to Saka and then I could do Henderson up to David Raya. I also like the look of Brian and Mbeumo, but I could take a -4 to do something like Jota to Mbeumo, Salah to Saka and Henderson to Raya and basically cover off the main 3 players that I'm looking to bring in on wildcard. Now, there are other changes that I would make. I would probably change Smith Rowe to another 5.5 million option in Sade, for example, or McNeil. I would probably change Joao Pedro to a Calvert-Lewin. I would probably change Robertson to another cheap 4.5 million defender and someone like a Leif Davis. But it's absolutely not worth wildcarding for these final fringe options. It is the triple Arsenal that I'd want, and it is Brian and Mbeumo. That is the reason I probably want to wildcard. Is a -4 to save the wildcard worth it? Or should I wildcard and roll transfers for the next 3 or 4 weeks to have 5 transfers in game week 12, which is the other window that I would look to play in my wildcard? I said in my last video, it was about 70% chance that I wildcard. I'm about 60% now. I'm maybe trying to convince myself too much that I should save the wildcard and just take a -4, for example. But I do feel like that chance of wildcard is dropping slightly. Now, of course, the points that I score on Saturday might change my mind going into Saturday evening or even into Sunday when I will look to activate the wildcard to potentially get some price changes. But I do wonder if there aren't enough players I'm certain on to force me to wildcard, and maybe I should save it for later down the line. Now, a lot of things on this game week and looking in the game week will be decided close to the deadline. I have been using a newsletter called Lazy FPL. You have seen me use them in my deadline streams. They often come with a little bit of team news, but I use them for their newsletter that they send out every single week on a Friday, which gives a late bit of information on injuries, on press conferences, on players to buy and things like that. As you can see with the video on screen, it literally takes 5-10 seconds to sign up. All you do is put your email in. So we'll have the final decisions video for you tomorrow where I discuss my team and all the stuff from the press conference as well. If you want an extra bit of resource, you can check them out with the link in the description down below as well. It is so simple to sign up. Leave any questions you have and you want answered in that final decisions video from me tomorrow in the comment section down below. We will, of course, have updates from all the managers, all the press conferences as well in that video, plus any final benching decisions I do on my team. But I am feeling pretty locked in, and I'm sure we'll talk about a Game Week 6 wildcard in that video as well. Thank you all so much for watching. 2,000 likes is the aim. Drop any questions you have in the comment section down below. Subscribe if you are new around here. Make sure you've checked out the Know the Score podcast. That is so many plugs for the end of one video. Thank you for watching. Links are above. Links are everywhere. Have a lovely weekend if I don't see you before then. And I'll see you very soon.